Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we have a very surprising conversation, and I'll explain that in just a minute, but with a phenomenal opportunity to talk with Vidhya. Now, Vidhya, you're a three-time B2B CMO. You're also a former chief product officer. So you've held multiple roles within the C-suite, which a lot of us as CMOs haven't had the opportunity to do that, kind of see things from the other side. And we're going to use that background, and we're going to talk about the things that are the most important challenges that we face as C-suite executives. Because the first time that you became a CMO, like, you didn't give up your responsibilities to be a CMO, but you adopted a huge amount of more responsibilities for the overall growth of the business. And that's the question that we ask every B2B C-suite executive that comes on to this podcast. And then you take all the answers to, like, what are the two greatest challenges that we have to grow our businesses? And we're going to talk about the top three. But before we get into that, what I'd love to do is turn it over to you, because that's not the only thing that defines you. In fact, you and I were just talking about, we both love hiking, and you do a lot of hiking with your husband. In fact, you're going to hit a milestone this year that I'm going to let you talk about. But if you wouldn't mind just expanding more on your background, and then we'll dive right in.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks, Steve. Great to be here. I know this is my second time around on your show, so great to be here. Yeah, I mean, as you said, I've had the opportunity to be in two different capacities in the C-suite. Certainly, I have a product background. I have been an engineer. I've been a product manager. I've kind of done marketing. So it's like a culmination. And I always think about my USP as, the intersection of products, marketing, and go-to-market. That's what I love doing. And it makes every day a fun endeavor, right? So yeah, I mean, on a personal note, as you mentioned, you love hiking. I used to live in Colorado, went to school in Colorado. But yeah, certainly we are going to hit like 200 miles of hiking this year. I'm very excited about it. Hopefully we'll get a little more, because we still have 2 more months for the year. But yeah, it's what keeps the work-life balance going. So yeah.
I love that. We share a passion for Colorado. I live just south of Denver. And so I go jogging most days, and I look out at the Colorado Rockies, and I'm just amazed by it. We actually had Northern Lights here 2 days ago.
Yeah. Even in California, I think last night. Yeah.
Phenomenal. We don't get that too often, right? Well, let's do this. Let's kind of dive in deep, because this idea of mastering everyday obstacles to scale our business. So here are the big challenges that came out of putting all together the answers from all the C-suite executives on what are our biggest challenges to grow. So the first one was internal alignment. Over 70% of C-suite executives said that's our number one challenge, just aligning internally. The second one was a lack of deep understanding of the voice of our customer. Right. That's the highest authority voice in our business, higher than the board, higher than us as C-suite executives, right? That's where we should be aligning behind. And then the third one is one that as CMOs, we know really well. How do we balance long-term versus short-term? Nobody goes into a board meeting and has a board member look and say, hey, Vidhya, how is that brand development plan going?
Yeah.
Nobody says that, right? Like, hey, what's this quarter's quota look like? What's next quarter turning out? So it's something that we know we have to work on and we have to develop, even though it's something that we don't get a lot of credit for, and we don't get a lot of credit in terms of how that impacts growth.
Yeah.
But it does in a big way. And so I would love to just ask you kind of just to start out here, right? Is because we're going to try to unpack this today. And what does this mean for scaling our business? But talk to me about what you feel is the everyday barriers to creating sustainable growth that aren't the sexy ones, right? The ones that we've really got to focus on.
Yeah, look, I think things usually boil down in my head, right? Things are usually very simple things that we all struggle with, because as an organization, I can tell you about, what we are going through, right? Is in your organizations, this is Q4 for us. So you are trying to hit the targets, create the quarter pipe, close deals. So it's all hands on deck. And internal alignment, if it's not there across the sellers, across the marketing people doing the demand gen or events or whatever it is that we are trying to align on, no pun intended, right? you're going to have a lot of friction and no outcomes, right? Which is not a good thing for the organization. So sometimes the hardest nut to crack is the simplest of things that we struggle with, which is ensuring our teams cross functionally are aligned to the same goals that we all want to drive. And sometimes you have organizations all running towards hitting the goals in silos, and not enough communication across cross-functional teams is a huge challenge. Again, none of this is intentional because people are all running fast and furious every day, but they just forget to do it. And that small lapse of, not doing certain things just creates friction and creates unnecessary anxiety and finger pointing, right? At times that translates into a lot of noise, right? So the signal to noise ratio at times is primarily because of simple communication, simple engagements, keeping everybody from a sense of knowing what's happening and ensuring everybody's engaged in what we need to do cross functionally is the simplest of things that people can and should do to avoid the internal anxiety that happens with more organizations. And then that creates sort of a ripple effects in terms of how it becomes a barrier to expand and grow things because you can't get past this friction points within the organization. So to me, primarily when I think about scaling an organization, it's the ability for us to identify things that can be rinse and repeat. Because the operational things, the processes, these should be like clockwork, right? We shouldn't have issues in that. As the organization matures, depending on what size you are, I've worked for like the Cisco's of the world, ServiceNows of the world, and I work for Prophix now, which is a much smaller company. So you can see the difference in sort of maturity of what is rinse and repeat and you can rely on versus where you have to sort of engage at varying levels of processes to ensure that everybody understands the mode of engagement, the way we communicate, way we bring people in to ensure there's no misalignment. And if we can get past that, then scaling that is going to be a breeze.
You paint such a vivid picture, and as chief marketing officers, we know we have demand gen marketing. We have to have customer marketing. We have to have product marketing. I mean, we're like really disciplined in all these different ways that we need to communicate. You just so vividly painted a picture thereof is we don't have a plan for internal communications. We typically don't even think about it, right? It's like, oh, there's decisions that are made at the C-suite and then yeah, everybody goes out into their own departments. They're in charge of their own departments and they're going to just communicate that and everybody's going to kind of magically know what they need to do. And you brought up that you had worked at Cisco. I just had a woman on the podcast, she's a 3-time B2B CMO. She was a CMO at Cisco, IBM, GE. She was global head of marketing at Nielsen IQ. And she says, Steve, there's only one thing I want to talk about in your podcast. And I'm like, well, okay, what is that? Right. And she was like, the lack of execution. She was, it's where all good strategies go to die.
Yeah.
And so we can have the best go-to-market strategy, but guess what? High performance teams are what pull it off.
Yes.
And we just don't talk to them the way that we know that we should, but we're marketers. They're an audience for us, right? A really important audience.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you brought up another critical piece of the top down versus bottoms up, right? And I think there is always that challenge also for a majority of the organizations where we make decisions in the C-suite and it's on us as leaders to ensure that everybody is aware of what are our goals as a company and what does it mean for each of us and what is our joint MBOs in terms of working with sales, working with products, working with customers, customer service, right? So all of these components that we are as marketers tied at the hip, right? In different ways. Think about cross-sell versus a new logo moment, right? So you're kind of partnering with folks and ensuring we have something that we can bring to market and really drive pipeline for the organization. I think that's a piece that's all, from a leadership perspective, it's on us to ensure we can trickle down and translated for everybody involved, that you have to align and partner with the CS folks, with the sales folks, with the product team. Because if we can do this together, a launch, think of a product launch. A product launch requires products and product marketing to be working together. You need demand gen to know what exactly the messaging is. You need the sellers to know that there is going to be a launch and a campaign that they should be ready to catch, right? The SDRs, the BDRs. So it requires a village for every single initiative, big or small, to make it successful. And so the internal alignment is the biggest first step for us as an organization to show maturity to then be able to scale.
Big thing I'm taking away here is that, like, so important. We need to dedicate more time to it. And in our previous conversation, you said it's an ongoing process, Steve. You're
Yes.
like as much as I would like my wife to probably feel that she could tell me something once and then it's good to go. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in business either, right? It's not like one and done. We can kind of like send out an email and everybody kind of knows what's going on. This is a continual marketing
Yes.
strategy, communication strategy, right?
Yes. Yeah, look, I think it is a continuous process and it's ongoing, right? And especially think about like when you have new leaders come into organizations, right? We have to think about resetting that. You're never one and done. So like that part of ongoing evaluation, like it's like the feedback loop, right? It's like, okay, we did this. Now we have a new player in town. So now we have to kind of work that to ensure this, whatever we have going on, is in alignment with my new partner. So, like, for instance, I have a new partner, a CRO, that joined our company. So it's really like important for me to spend the time with my new CRO to ensure that we are aligned and we have the same approach and we are joined at the hip to ensure it's successful. And, the other part I almost feel like is individually, each of us is not, I think of the orchestra analogy always. We are not individual musicians, right? Or, we're not instruments in an orchestra or vocalists in an orchestra. We need everybody to sing from the same sheet for this to sound like an orchestra, right? So we all need to perform our piece for this to be successful, and we all have to be in sync. So that's the biggest piece that I feel like, part of the internal alignment is definitely leadership, alignment at different levels within the organization, but also making sure that we have individually, like each of us as individuals, play our part to be in sync with the rest of the team.
I love that analogy with an orchestra. So here's what it means to me. What you were just saying there is that it's not like the string section plays for a little bit and stops and turns it over to the horn section, right? And
Yes.
then the horn section stops and the drum section the percussion section comes in. Like, we talk about this as a team sport, but it's not like we're handing a baton. Like, marketing creates a lead and then they turn it over to sales and sales goes on. We forget about that and we go back to creating more leads, right? This is an orchestration that comes together. 86% of B2B deals, this is a Forrester stat, stall at some point, right? And so there's no way that the board is going to say, hey, Vidya, as soon as you turn over that MQL or that SQL, you're good to go, right? There's massive amount of like nurture campaigns and sequences and things that we can do to help. We are a team coming together. We are an orchestra that continually plays until we actually get that closed deal, right? And so I love that analogy because we act more like a baton pass, right? We tend to like say, that's our job. Now we turn it over to you. Now you got to do what you do, right? And that's just not the way that it works.
No, I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, this is something it's really close to my heart, where part of the challenge sometimes is everybody thinks if you have an event, you do the event and you're done. It's not, right? As part of being a field marketer or an event marketer, your job is to ensure the post aspects, to ensure every lead is getting, right, has the details to be warm enough to be handed off to a rep and followed through to ensure that it's routed to the right rep and everything is happening as expected. And if it's not warm enough, to your point, like how do we create the nurture to make it warmer and to drive it down the funnel? So I think it's a very, very important aspect. And most organizations and individuals suffer with this is like they think it's their job is done as soon as a post-event report goes out, right? It's not. Their job is to ensure every rep has been assigned and has the right details for that to be converted to closed one. The solo performers versus the orchestra is going to be a critical transition for a lot of folks, but that's what's going to make the execution, as you said earlier. I think it's important for execution to happen flawless. This notion of being part of an orchestra is a very critical thought process to ensure that we are always in sync and sound great together. Right?
Absolutely. I love that. Sound great together too. That's a really important part of that, right?
Yeah.
Another important part of this that we brought up at the very beginning is this idea of a balance of long-term brand development, short-term pipeline development. How do you think about that? You're working now with a brand new CRO. There's an opportunity to like get into the same mindset, and we're locked at the hip. Absolutely, we're a team. But your CRO has a quota over their head. Their compensation is tied to short term. That's one of the biggest issues in our business, is that we act based on how we're compensated, right? We've got lives, we've got families, we've got colleges we're trying to pay for our kids, and mortgages we're paying, and healthcare that's about ready to triple, and you name it. How do you come in alignment? We talked about alignment, but along the short term and long term together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm living this right now. I joined Prophix just about 6 months ago. I came in sort of the latter part of the year, and we are in Q4. We all want to win this quarter. It's all hands on deck. For me, when I think about 26 is not far out, and we have a sales kickoff coming. We have a new CRO. So it's really about thinking about how we can structure and align and operate together as a team, as a go-to-market team, to ensure that we are successful. Obviously, the past 6 months, when you think about it, part of it is the feedback loop. Is to really assess what worked and what didn't work. As leaders, as much as what's in front of us in quarter, closing the deals and winning what's in front of us now is important. But as leaders, part of it is also that strategic thought process to say, as part of the 6-month process, what are the lessons learned? What do we want to do differently? What do we need to tweak as we think about where the misalignments are within the organization, how we think about resources, and what channels do we want to invest on? All of those are parallel processes as leaders for us to think. We should be able to think about what we're doing now, and then how do we take what's working, what's not working, start, stop, continue process into planning for next year, because that's the only way to then back to where the topic for today we are discussing, which is how do you scale an organization? That's how you scale, is this constant feedback loop and managing today versus 2 weeks for tomorrow.
There was another multiple time B2B CMO that came on, and she said, today's brand is tomorrow's demand.
Yes.
I know. I love that too. I was like, oh, I want to write that down. I talk about it all the time. And I shared that with I don't know how many CROs. And I want to get their opinion on that too. Every single one of them. I have never shared that with a CRO who didn't violently agree, because they know 95% of the market's not in the market right now. But if we start talking to them when they're in market, then we've already lost the game.
Yeah.
They probably don't know who we are. We love to all represent brands that are household names. That's not true for 99% of us. We've got to earn our right into the short list. And if we don't, and we're not there in advance before they get serious, then we're left out of the equation. And she went on to say that it also, the salespeople have to build up the trusted advisor role.
Yeah.
We can't just be vendors selling. And if we do the branding right, then that cycles that we take away from the sales team in building up trust that is really valuable during that time. I love what you're talking about in terms of kind of this balance and thinking about next year. And I think there's a lot of CMOs that don't do a good job of communicating its importance all the way through, like LinkedIn Edelman trust barometers that say, hey, a lack of thought leadership today is a detriment in the sales cycle. A lack of it means that's a demerit point against us. There's plenty of stuff that we can do to build up the argument. Like, look, we got to be doing both of this at the same time. But here's my question for you. There's a perception out there that if I do brand building, that's a separate activity, a separate set of resources that I have to dedicate that take away from
Yeah.
building short-term pipeline. And I know you and I talked about this before, that we don't have that point of view. There's a lot that we can be doing that builds overall our brand and our pipeline at the same time. And I'd just like to hear your point of view on that.
Yeah, today's brands, tomorrow's demand, spot on, right? I strongly believe in that. As you said, if you don't know the brand, like it's just like in the phone, right? If you're getting a phone call and it shows spam risk, or it's not in your contact, you're not going to pick up. I mean, it's happens to all of us every day. Three phone calls just came in for me. But I think it's the exact same thing for prospects, the prospect journey that we all try to warm and nurture and warm the doormat for sales, right? That's the typical process. It all boils down again to some simple basics, which is the funnel. You cannot have the funnel without awareness. What's top of the funnel? You have awareness, consideration, and decision. You can't just plop a lead at the bottom of the funnel and you know how it's going to go. They're not going to be the right lead. They may not be warm enough. And you're just creating an unnecessary lead. This is the number game. Sometimes CMOs get pressured to say, well, you need to generate this amount of MQL and this amount of pipeline. And then people start getting pressured to play different games, right? I'm not saying everybody's doing that, but if you're not doing it, our team members are, right? In some form. It's really thinking about, if you are being honest and if you think about go to market broadly in a comprehensive manner, the funnel is a simple way of everybody understanding is if you don't have top of the funnel, anything that just gets inserted in the middle is not going to have the same return. You need to go through the process. We can speed up the nurture process from awareness, consideration to decision, but it needs to happen in some form. That's my point of view. That's something that I instituted in every place I went is, yes, it's a hard job, like trying to sell to the board or even to your CEO or CFO, right? When you think about budget and how you want to allocate budget. But I think for the right leadership team and the right board, people understand, people are starting to get it, right? I mean, nobody wants to engage with spam caller. And it's the same for anybody like us trying to engage a prospect when they have no idea who you are. That's just simple basics that every organization should institute. Now, depending on how much money you have, you can certainly get a little creative about how you combine awareness and middle of the funnel a little bit, tofu and mofu, but it does require some thought process. It's not just going to drop in one day as a hand raiser and you convert them, right?
Yeah,
It's
not at all. Especially these days where we all know that the buyer journey is changing quite dramatically and they want to wait longer and longer to even talk to us. What it means is they're determining who they trust. They're determining the brands in the marketplace that when they're making big decisions, and B2B buyers make decisions much more emotionally than they do rationally. That's been proven. They're taking big risk. And you're not going to take a big risk in your career by going with a company that you don't know and you don't trust. You're just not. Right?
Exactly. Sorry, I'm going to add another piece to this because there's another aspect of what's happening for all of us is the switch from SEO to GEO, right? Generative Engine Optimization, which is the ChatGPT generated SEO, right? Think of it that way. So even more, and I know this is your favorite topic too, is this notion of owned media transitioning into earned media, where we really want to build a brand presence where people are engaging, where our brand is known and people are talking about it, people are including or mentioning us, and really building brand authority is a way where ChatGPT or Perplexity or all these other generative tools are really using to pull in the right content. I use Gemini or any of the GPTs that we have on a regular basis. That's going to be a transition. So if you're not there, if you're not being mentioned, just our owned media alone is not going to cut it anymore. Brand becomes even more important in the age of GPTs and LLMs.
Well, that goes into this last area because authenticity is a big part and trust is what the LLMs, the Geminis, the ChatGPTs of the world are looking for. This is where you and I were talking before, is that this voice of the customer is so important. We listen to our peers. Like that same woman that talked about today's brand is tomorrow's demand. She said, see, every time we put the voice of the customer ahead of our voice in
Yeah.
every way, it always performs better. That's because our customers are the trusted voice of the peer community who we're selling to. But here's a stat that came out of a McKinsey study. And they said that not only do we know that the voice of the customer is important, and it leads to ideas and innovations in our business, it's the most important voice in our company. But they said less than 15% of companies actually execute on a voice of the customer program, right?
Yeah.
So again, everything that we've talked about, we're 29 minutes in. We haven't talked about one external factor. We control how much we talk to and listen to our customers, how much time and effort we put into that, and how much time we get busy and we just know that's a good thing, but we don't do it. We don't operationalize it.
Yeah.
So here's my last question for you. We've covered so much territory here. If there was one thing that you wanted everybody to take away from this conversation, what would that one thing be?
There's many things actually. If you were to ask me for one thing, I think it'd probably be focus on internal alignment and focus on simplicity and going back to basics. It's good things really, but those are basic things that you have within the control of your organization. I think that's going to be the stepping stone for you to evolve and scale and be successful. It boils down to very simple things within the organization. And that's what I try to focus on because sometimes we create complexity unnecessarily. And you kind of whittle it down, it boils down to focusing on your simple funnel or focusing on ensuring you all communicate with each other. So these are some basic things and principles that we all as leaders can encourage our teams and also educate our teams and remind our teams on a regular basis so we can at least we have the basics covered and then everything else is just built on top of that.
I love it. And here's what I know, Vidya, is that people are going to have questions. Is it appropriate that I give out a link to your LinkedIn profile so people could reach out and ask those questions?
Absolutely.
Here's what I'll say in closing is that the mission of this podcast is to bring the different and unique perspectives and insights and backgrounds and experiences from C-suite executives that have to think about their functional roles, but also have to think about how do we overall move this business forward? We are the ones that are accountable to the board. And so we have to take on that role. And I just think you just did a phenomenal job today of bringing in unique perspectives and refocusing us on those things that we think are simple, right? But we don't live it. And so I just thank you for that reminder. Thank you for coming on today and sharing your insights. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, thanks for having me.